Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are plunging into the complex and, well, often misunderstood world of the Egyptian god Set. You might know him primarily as the bad guy, the villain in that really famous Egyptian myth.
Yeah, the main antagonist.
But the sources we have for this deep dive, they tell a much richer, much more complicated story.
Absolutely. We've got some fascinating material today, excerpts from a pretty comprehensive Wikipedia article and a detailed video script. And our mission with these sources is to really extract the key information and unpack Set's truly multifaceted nature.
Right.
Moving beyond that simple villain tag to understand his, well, surprising role in creation, his crucial place in cosmic conflict, and how Egyptian beliefs about him shifted so dramatically over millennia.
Okay, let's unpack this. Set's story starts way back in the foundational myths, specifically with that divine family known as the Ennead. Who was he in that original lineup?
He was definitely part of that core group, the 9 primordial gods. The sources tell us he's the son of Geb, who represents the earth,
The Earth God.
not the sky goddess.
And he has some incredibly famous siblings, Osiris, Isis, Nephthys, and Horus the Elder. So, born into prime divine real estate, essentially.
Pretty much.
What were his primary associations right from the beginning?
Well, right from the start, his domains and associations set him apart quite dramatically from his siblings. He was the god of deserts, storms, disorder, violence, and notably foreigners.
Foreigners, interesting.
Yeah, he even held this title, Lord of Libya, which really highlights his connection to the lands beyond Egypt's borders.
So his domain was the Red Land, right? The wild, untamed desert, contrasting with his brother Osiris's association with the fertile Black Land, the Nile Valley.
Exactly.
The sources highlight this as an early balance. Was this chaos order dynamic seen as purely negative at first, or was it something different?
That's a great question. Initially, it wasn't just a negative force. It was, seen more as the necessary counterpoint to the fertile, ordered land. You need the wildness, the boundary, even the destructive storms as part of the complete picture of the world. He's also associated with consorts, like his sister Nephthys. And interestingly, the sources mention foreign goddesses, like Anat and Astarte, appearing as his consorts in some accounts.
Reinforcing that connection to the outside.
Which really reinforces that connection to the outside world, the foreign, yeah.
And what about offspring? The sources mention some disputed parentage for certain deities.
Yes, gets a little fluid there. Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification in the afterlife, is very commonly assumed to be the son of Set and Nephthys.
Right, that's the usual story.
Though some scholars have debated if the ancient Egyptians always saw him that way. So Bek, the crocodile god, is also mentioned as his son in some accounts.
Yeah.
And there's a specific crocodile deity named Maga, described as born from these relationships. It just shows how interconnected and sometimes, well, ambiguous the divine family tree could be.
Fascinating how those connections aren't always rigid. Now, speaking of unique aspects, we have to talk about the Set animal. It's one of the most recognizable yet mysterious parts of his depiction.
The enigmatic creature. Egyptologists call it the Set animal or the Shah animal, and you hit the nail on the head. The key is that it's never been clearly identified with any single known animal from the Egyptian world or elsewhere.
It really does look like a mashup. Our sources list comparisons to, well, everything. A Saluki dog, an aardvark, an African wild dog, donkey, hyena, jackal, pig.
Yeah.
Even suggested antelope, giraffe, or a fennec fox.
But despite those comparisons, its features are remarkably specific and consistently depicted. That distinctive downward curving snout, long ears with squared-off tips.
So square ears are key.
Definitely. And a thin forked tail with those arrow-shaped tufts of fur at the end and a slender canine body.
Some early theories did lean towards the giraffe because of features that look a bit like ossicones, the horns.
But as the sources note, Egyptians had very distinct and accurate ways of depicting giraffes, so that idea is generally dismissed now.
And you see him depicted as this creature or as a human with the animal's head. Though it seems that later on, particularly during the late period, the sources say he's more frequently shown specifically as a donkey or a man with a donkey head. The Book of the Fayum even depicts him with a flamingo head, which just sounds wild.
It does. What's truly interesting, though, is the linguistic connection the sources point out. The ancient Egyptian word for donkey
Okay.
was actually determined or depicted using a hieroglyph of the Set animal symbol. So that really solidifies that later visual link to the donkey.
Okay, makes sense.
We see the earliest possible depictions of the Set animal stretching way back to the Amratian culture, although those are, well, debated. But he makes a certain undeniable appearance on the ceremonial mace head of Scorpion II from the Nakata 3 phase.
Wow.
With that clear head and forked tail, he's been around for a very long time.
Okay, so we have the wild origins, the unique look, and a very long history. Which brings us to the part he's most famous for. The Osiris myth. This is where the narrative around Set takes a really dramatic turn, right?
This is the pivotal myth, yeah. It really cements his reputation as the adversary. In this central story, Set is the usurper, the brother who commits fratricide he murders, and then mutilates his own brother, Osiris.
And the motive the sources highlight seems pretty straightforward. Intense jealousy over Osiris's popularity and his successful, benevolent reign, which brought order and civilization to Egypt.
Yeah, classic jealousy. But the plot itself is anything but simple. It's quite elaborate and frankly chilling. Set has this magnificent custom-made chest built perfectly tailored to Osiris's measurements.
Like exactly his size.
Exactly. At a feast, he offers it as a prize, maybe saying something like, whoever fits in this chest perfectly gets to keep it.
Okay, a deadly party game.
Pretty much. Osiris, unsuspecting, perhaps demonstrating his strength or just playing along, steps in. He fits perfectly.
Of course he does.
And Set, seizing the moment, slams the lid shut, seals it, and throws it into the Nile.
Wow.
A terrible act, but it gets worse. To prevent Osiris's incredibly determined sister-wife Isis from resurrecting him because Egyptians believe so strongly in the power of proper burial and ritual to restore life.
Right.
Set later retrieves the chest, hacks Osiris's body into numerous pieces, like tons of them, and scatters them all across Egypt.
Oh, man. So this act is really framed as more than just a brother killing a brother.
Much more.
It's an act of cosmic rebellion, an attempt to utterly destroy the concept of order and benevolent rule that Osiris represented. It's the ultimate disruption of Ma'at, the cosmic balance.
Precisely. And with Osiris gone from the earthly throne, the conflict isn't over. Not by a long shot. It escalates into a long, brutal war for the throne of Egypt, primarily against Osiris's son, Horus.
Now, the sources point out something interesting here. There are actually two traditions about the relationship between Set and Horus. Sometimes Horus is Osiris's son, making him Set's nephew.
Which is the most common version.
And sometimes he's depicted as Set's brother. Does this inconsistency get resolved in the myths?
No, not really. Not neatly, anyway. That inconsistency persists across various texts and depictions. But regardless of their exact relation, the contest for kingship is fierce and long. It's often shown as violent battles, but also as a complex legal judgment before the Eni, the assembled council of deities.
The gods have to judge.
Exactly. They have to decide who is the rightful king.
And different gods step up as judges. Geb, Ra, or Adam are mentioned. Other deities get involved too. Thoth often acts as a mediator or helper.
The god of wisdom.
Right, and Isis obviously is actively aiding her son, Horus.
What's truly fascinating is that in some accounts, like the dramatic text known as the Contendings of Horus and Seth, this dispute for the throne drags on for 80 years.
80 years. That's
Long time. And part of the reason it takes so long is that the creator god, who is meant to make the final judgment, seems to, well, inexplicably favor Set.
80 years of divine political maneuvering and conflict. The violence is intense. And it's not just the gods themselves fighting. Their followers and supporters get drawn into the conflict in later accounts.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that chaotic episode where Isis tries to harpoon Set but accidentally hits Horus?
Yes. And Horus's reaction in some versions is immediate and violent. In a fit of rage, he cuts off his own mother's head.
Wait, he cuts off his own mother's head. Wow, that really shows just how chaotic and brutal this struggle for power was.
It really does.
And Thoth has to step in and replace it with a cow's head, which is one of the explanations offered for Isis's common depiction, wearing the cow horns and sun disk. It's just visceral.
It is. And it gets even more visceral with certain specific episodes described in the sources, like the sexual abuse and the mutilation.
These are particularly stark moments in the myths. One episode involves Set sexually abusing Horus. The sources note this is partly intended to degrade Horus, to assert Set's dominance, but it also reflects Set's own forceful and sometimes, well, indiscriminate sexuality. The source mentions this episode involved homosexual desire as part of the power play.
And there was a perceived real danger for Horus here, because semen in ancient Egyptian tradition could be seen as a potent, even dangerous substance.
Right.
Almost like a poison that could confer illness or weakness. In some texts, being sexually abused by Set actually makes Horus ill.
But Contendings has that famous twist, doesn't it? Horus manages to catch Set's semen instead of being affected by it.
He does.
And then Isis retaliates in a truly inventive way, putting Horus's own semen onto lettuce leaves.
Titus, yeah.
Which Set then unknowingly eats because lettuce was considered a somewhat aphrodisiacal plant associated with Set.
Right, associated with fertility and Set.
Yeah.
And the outcome for Set is unexpected and symbolic. Horus's semen manifests on Set's forehead as a golden disc.
A golden disc.
Yeah. Set is effectively impregnated by Horus's semen and gives birth to this disc from his forehead.
Wow. In Contendings, Thoth takes this disc and places it on his head. But the sources mentioned earlier, accounts where it's actually Thoth himself who is produced by this unusual birth emerging from Set's head.
Exactly. Then you have the related episodes of mutilation. Horus injures or outright steals Set's testicles,
Ouch.
which is clearly symbolic of a loss of Set's virility, his chaotic strength, his power to generate followers. And Set, in turn, damages or tears out one or even both of Horus's eyes.
The loss of Horus's eye is incredibly significant, isn't it? As a sky god, Horus's right eye is the sun, his left eye is the moon.
Precisely.
Its destruction represents the darkening of the moon during its phases or eclipses.
Exactly. But the eye is usually restored, which is crucial. Sometimes Horus takes it back himself, or other deities like Isis, Thoth, or Hathor retrieve or heal it for him.
The wedge eye.
The heel eye, yeah, the wedge eye. It becomes this powerful symbol of protection and wholeness.
And the sources mention a compelling scholarly argument, specifically from Egyptologist Herman Tevelde, that connects these seemingly separate episodes. He suggests that the lost testicles are actually a later variation of Set losing his semen, and that the moon-like disc that emerges from Set's forehead is the Eye of Horus.
That's right. This reading links the sexual abuse and the mutilation into one larger narrative arc. Set attacks Horus, but in the process, loses his own power source, the semen or testicles. Horus retaliates, symbolically reversing the dominance by impregnating Set, and from Set's forehead emerges the Eye of Horus, which Set had previously damaged or stolen.
And Thoth, being a moon deity and god of wisdom, taking the disc or being born from it makes powerful symbolic sense in that context.
Absolutely.
The restoration of the Eye of Horus is therefore not just about Horus's physical healing, but about the return of the moon's brightness, the restoration of kingship to Horus, and the broader return of Mot cosmic order after Set's disruption.
The sources even note that sometimes near the very end of the long feud, both of Horus's eyes and Set's testicles are restored, making both gods whole again in a final act of cosmic balance.
Wow, it's such a layered story.
It's a complex set of myths that really dives deep into themes of conflict, power, sexuality, and ultimately the restoration of order.
This feels like a good point to transition to a side of Set that often gets completely overlooked when you only focus on the Osiris myth, his crucial positive role.
This is where the paradox of Set really deepens. Because despite being the god of chaos, disorder, and violence on Earth,
Oh, those things.
he had a vital, essential function in the heavens. He was the fierce protector of Ra, the sun god.
He stood right on the prow of Ra's solar bark as it traveled through the incredibly dangerous underworld, the Duat, every single night,
Every night.
battling the monstrous serpent Apep, or Apophis, who sought to devour the sun and plunge creation into eternal darkness.
Exactly. It's a profound paradox. The god of chaos on the earthly plane is absolutely essential for maintaining cosmic order in the celestial realm, ensuring the sun rises each morning.
Without him, Ra doesn't make it.
Without Set's strength, his ferocity, his willingness to face down ultimate evil in the form of Apep, Ra couldn't complete his journey. The sources even mention late period depictions showing Set in this role with a falcon's head, taking on Horus's guise.
Really? So even blending with his rival in that positive role.
Yeah, highlighting how even in this positive role, there could be overlaps or fluidity with his adversary.
So he is both the embodiment of destruction and disorder and the essential guardian of the cosmic cycle. That kind of duality must have meant his reputation wasn't static throughout the, 3,000 years of Egyptian history?
It absolutely wasn't static. It changed quite dramatically. There were periods where he was actually highly revered, particularly during the Second Intermediate period, when the Hyksos, people from the Near East, came to power and ruled parts of Lower Egypt from their capital at Avaris.
Right, Avaris.
They chose Set as their patron deity
Yeah.
because they saw similarities between him and their own chief god, Hadad, who was also associated with storms and power.
The Hyksos king Apophis is specifically mentioned in the sources as worshipping only Set.
That's right.
The sources include a quote saying, King Apophis chose for his lord the god Seth. He did not worship any other deity in the whole land except Seth.
Pretty exclusive.
It's interesting how the sources also note that scholar Jan Assmann argued this kind of exclusive worship within a traditional Egyptian polytheistic system that didn't typically conceive of a lonely supreme god was seen as potentially representing a manifestation of evil.
Yes, reporting the source's discussion of that interpretation is important. It wasn't the standard Egyptian way.
Then later, during the powerful Ramesside period, the dynasty founders actually had strong ties to Set's priesthood. You have kings named after him, like Seti, Sest,
Man of Set.
and Setnot, Set is strong. Ramesses II even commemorated the Set cult at Pi-Ramesses with a year 400 stela, celebrating the anniversary of Set's cult there.
So periods of real prominence.
Definitely. But then things changed drastically again. After later foreign conquests, like by the Kushites and Persians, Set's association with foreigners, which was once perhaps just about the wild lands, turns decidedly negative.
Exactly. He becomes increasingly associated with these foreign oppressors. This is when the process of demonization really takes hold. Set is increasingly vilified in texts and depictions.
Right.
His defeat by Horus is celebrated more emphatically, and his images are deliberately defaced, his name sometimes even erased from monuments. He becomes almost synonymous with pure evil, cast as the ultimate adversary.
The sources mention that the Greeks later associated him with their monstrous figure Typhon, and interestingly also with Yahweh by some outsiders, based on their perception of worshippers as onolatrists, donkey worshippers, due to Set's later association with the donkey.
Right, exploring those historical perceptions noted in the sources. Again, this is how others saw them.
And the source also points to Dr. Karakuni's documentary, The Birth of the Devil, which discusses this process of demonization and how Set, through this historical shift, was positioned as an absolute evil figure.
Perhaps paralleling shifts towards more singular concepts of evil in other developing religious traditions? Yeah, that's the argument presented.
But even with this intense demonization, his cult didn't completely vanish, did it? That feels like another fascinating contradiction.
It absolutely did not vanish entirely, and this is key to understanding his enduring power. Set's cult persisted, particularly in more outlying regions, the oases in the western desert, like Karga, Dakhla, Deir el-Hagar, Mut, and Kelis.
The oases, okay.
In these areas, far from the political and religious centers, he was still revered, often as the Lord of the Oasis or the Lord of the Town.
And his consort, Nephthys, is often mentioned as being venerated right alongside him in his temples in these remote areas.
Right there we go.
And even though she was also deeply integrated into the Assyrian pantheon as Isis's sister and helper, this really illustrates the Egyptian comfort with seemingly paradoxical dualities.
And the ability of deities to exist in multiple spheres simultaneously, yeah.
It shows that even when officially demonized, the power and significance of the untamed, chaotic, boundary-defining aspects of existence that Set represented were forces the Egyptians couldn't or didn't entirely suppress.
Especially in those liminal spaces like the oases that bordered the deep desert. His power still resonated there.
And where specifically were these centers of worship? The sources give us some details about temples and cult locations.
Yes. Key ancient centers included ombos, and confusingly, there were two significant locations called ombos.
Two ombos, right?
Oxyrhynchus and parts of the Fayum area as well.
Sapir-Meru sounds particularly important during that Ramesside period when Set was more favored.
It was a very significant site, yeah. It had a major temple called the House of Set, Lord of Sapir-Meru. Its epithet, gateway to the desert, perfectly aligns with Set's domain.
Makes sense.
The complex there was substantial. It even included a secondary shrine, the House of Seth, powerful as his mighty arm. And Ramesses II either built or significantly modified a temple for Nephthys nearby called the House of Nephthys of Ramesses Merriman.
But the administration of the Set and Nephthys temples in Sapir-Meru was kept separate, wasn't it? The sources mention that detail.
Yes, that's an interesting administrative detail the sources provide. They note the Set and Nephthys temples in Sapir-Meru had their own distinct temple holdings and their own prophets, suggesting separate administrative structures despite their close physical proximity.
Interesting.
There was also another temple of Set in the nearby town of Piwina, and the sources suggest the likely existence of both Set and Nephthys houses in the town of Su, right at the entrance to the Fayum.
Okay.
Again, reflecting their close association, especially in these towns bordering the desert or important waterways.
We even get a peek into the everyday reality of running one of these temples from an anecdote in the Papyrus Bologna, right?
That's right. It's a relatable complaint from Prayam Hab, a prophet of the House of Set in a town called Punogem. He's clearly frustrated,
Oh, that sounds familiar.
lamenting not only the taxation and administrative burdens for his own temple, but also being unexpectedly burdened with responsibility for the ship. And I am likewise also responsible for the house of Nephthys, along with the remaining heap of district temples.
So, juggling multiple temple duties.
It really highlights the complex administrative landscape and the close, sometimes burdensome, ties between these cults.
And the sources note that while Set's status declined and he was demonized, Nephthys actually flourished during this time,
She did.
gaining status within the Osirian pantheon and becoming a significant tutelary or protective goddess. Again, that fascinating duality and complexity of the Egyptian religious landscape.
Where one part of a pair can rise while the other falls, yet they can still be venerated together, as Set and Nephthys continued to be in those outlying oases.
It's a powerful reminder that Egyptian religion wasn't a static, rigid system. It was incredibly dynamic, adapting and evolving over millennia, sometimes integrating what seemed to us like clear contradictions into its pantheon.
Absolutely.
And finally, we see traces of Set's enduring presence even in modern times.
Yeah, briefly mentioned in our sources are his recognition in modern religious movements, such as Kemetism, which aims to revive ancient Egyptian religion. And the Temple of Set, which follows a distinct philosophical path, often characterized as adversarial or Setian.
And of course, his powerful image pops up in popular culture. Our sources specifically cite Doctor Who,
Sutek.
where he appears as Sutek in both the classic series story Pyramids of Mars and the very recent Series 14 finale, depicted as a powerful, destructive entity.
A classic villain role there.
And small-scale mythology documentation websites and community archives also feature discussions and depictions of him, keeping his story alive.
So his powerful image, whether as a complex, chaotic force or a more straightforward villain, continues to resonate in different ways.
We have certainly taken a deep dive into Set today, starting from his ancient place in the Ennead as the god of the wild desert and storms, through his infamous betrayal of Osiris, the epic, brutal, and, while surprisingly bizarre, conflict with Horus,
Definitely bizarre at times.
his crucial paradoxical role protecting Ra from the forces of chaos, and his long journey through history from revered deity to officially vilified villain, yet still persisting in pockets of worship.
Set represents the untamed elements of existence, doesn't he? The chaos that is both inherently dangerous and, paradoxically, essential for the functioning and regeneration of the cosmos as the Egyptians understood it. His story, with its inherent contradictions and dramatically shifting portrayals across history, offers a truly unique lens into how a society grapples with these fundamental forces.
It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? What does the human need for order and structure sometimes drive us to do?
Yeah.
Does it mean we inevitably fear and even demonize the wild, unpredictable, and necessary forces that are actually essential parts of the world? Just as Set was essential to Ra's nightly journey, even while embodying chaos on Earth.
It's a question that feels surprisingly relevant, far beyond the ancient world.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating, complex, and sometimes unsettling world of the Egyptian